my head.
Alright, we're sitting here.
I tend to, on my Sirius FM, they have the 15 chapter course doing. And you know, a lot of it is too odd. I don't even recognize the way. This is so where I was. We all stopped at it. Yeah, you were that would be so helpful.
Yeah, Chris?
What do you mean? Did you go live? Okay, let me go tell Lizzie.
I was good up to Thanksgiving. And all every year. Gordon, what you doing here?
Hey, Chris Lord, I'm the line. Must be doing something.
Oh, no.
I love that 3D thing. Yes, yeah, the one of you guys. But it was just neat. They used to follow it around. Oh, yeah. Good, you know. Yes.
Thank you so much. Oh, that's great. No, I am.
I go away.
I mean, well,
Two chapsticks, two pens, and each feet. What I don't know. What am I preparing myself and I don't sit on the side.
I'll be back.
no, this is wait. I'm sorry.
Hold on, folks, one sec, sorry.
Oh, yes, yes.
He'll hold it for a second.
That our
More
friends.
comedy, more stand-up. I think I did see that. It's been a long time. So there's a thing called Uncut Red, it's a woman of peace. Yes, that's right. She used to ride a competition. How many holidays they moved? I think one of those definitions. And basically sort of the setup there is come in, you do your well-established community. You're not allowed to do your normal shit. You have to either start talking or find everything. So that was the yeah, kids in the hall, Sarah Live. I saw Patton also first this before I meet anybody. I saw some after the I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, wait. Oh, that's a bummer. Go on. You, I don't, but I so I saw Kathy right now. The fourth one has done that. Someone killed Harvey and I she also comes to she has a real background. But it wasn't in cover. No, I'm saying that she could shoot from the hip. I've never seen like people were like the only problem don't say that. Hi. Oh, it's so nice to meet you. Yeah, usually it's I'm pretty comfortable. So I live in oh, she, yeah. Parents know Benny for a while.
Oh, really?
Lived in, yeah, Shaftesbury.
Oh,
Really
so
close.
close.
Yes, yeah, for a long time.
Wow, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's good. I'm finishing with all my last when I go back.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. And that's what
Yeah.
you Buffalo.
Then I'm gonna go back to LA.
Wow. Vermont is a very kind of travel. Well, yeah, I mean, also just like, I live first. There's pockets that like, recipe, so I've been to the area, it's like, trophy and tortillas.
It's such a, the cold, I feel like, my experience of Vermont has really just been like, coffee.
Yeah, smart.
Well, I mean, it's smart and also limited, but.
Yeah, that's it.
You know,
But
it's
the rest
really
of the-
beautiful, like Emerald Lake is over there and whatever.
Yeah.
It's really nice spring. I really don't want to go back right now.
No.
It's really cold.
Below, I got an email that was saying like below 20 to below 40
Yeah.
that week, and I was like, oh God.
Can we not do
Can we
that?
not go back
Yeah.
to that right now? But I really want to, like, I don't know. It's just great.
You're almost done. You're in the final stretch.
Oh, I mean, I'm excited about the actual going to school. I just don't want to go in the cold. you
Yes,
know?
I get you. I
It's
get
really
that.
just I get it. I'm not looking forward to it. Actual school is great.
Yeah, yeah. Dude, is the Blue Band Diner still there?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's still there. That's great. You know who used to own that diner? Do they still have it? So, Robert Redford used to own the Blue Band Diner. So, like a long time ago. Yeah. He apparently purchased it. I don't know what the story behind it is, but I love that diner.
So here we are. Welcome to True Story, February 2023. Our theme is not up, but our theme is safe and sound. And safe and sound through a pandemic and an uprising and everything. Here we are. And we've been doing this since May 2015. I believe that's 7 years, almost around 7. I'm not good with math, but we're around 7 years, and I'm so proud. I'm so proud of this program. I'm so proud of everybody who comes here and shares their truth, and I am so thankful that you feel safe and trustful with your stories. So I want to thank my storytellers, many of whom have been here since May 2015, including Angela and Troy and Christopher and Tracy. I want to thank everybody who's been supporting us. The program's growing. We are digital, so we're getting a wider and wider audience all the time. And in order to do that, please donate and support our program. I hate asking for money, but I'm going to just blatantly do it because it's really worth it. And we can't continue to do it without your support. So I'm not going to take up much time for myself this month. I just again want to say thank you for being here. Writers, thank you for trusting me. And I want to tell you that you have amazing storytellers coming up tonight. I could not be more proud or excited. And the first storyteller, Maha, is joining us for the first time. So please welcome Maha.
Okay, it's there. He points into the darkness. You'll see it. Once you're done, come back. The guard will let you in. You have the money? I nod. US dollars? Yes. Okay, good, go. I get up out of the wheelchair and step into the darkness. The heavy door slams shut behind me. My first instinct is to run. Run. But I don't. I'm alone. For the first time in a while, I am alone. We are safe. We made it. I let out one wild sob and ran it the fuck in. I walked down some steps into a walled parking lot. I look up. Big moon. I breathe. I turn around. Taking the tower looming over me, I count up 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. That's the room. I'd gone in not knowing when I'd be let out, and it was mind-bending to see it from the outside. So calm, so nondescript. You'd never know what had happened in there. The pain, the terror, sleep deprivation, no time. I gotta do this before it's too late. I stepped through a gate and onto this bustling street of Hamra in Beirut. Normalcy. People laughing, talking, smoking, flirting, yelling, oblivious. They have no idea what's going on above them. The sounds, the moaning, the beeping. That some of the kindest, sweetest doctors, nurses, janitors I have ever met, they are up there. They're doing their best in the COVID world, stretched way too thin. I tap my pocket, feeling the bulge of $5,000 US, and I trot off looking for the hospital bill pay center so I can finally take my mother home. When we first arrived at the hospital, we were a fucking mess. No idea where to go, sent from building to building until finally I yell cry at someone, and that got us to this deserted ass waiting room. She slumped in a chair, surrounded by a sea of identical chairs, which only makes her seem more frail. This hospital waiting room is vast, and it's just us two. The only sound is these fluorescent lights. Bzzz. I'm really used to my mother looking young for her age. But in this moment, she's 80, and she is really 80. It's been almost an hour. And then out of nowhere, shh, the automatic doors slide open. Mopeds, cars, people, shh, they close. Bzzz. So I walk over, I'm curious, hungry for distraction. It's this sweet trio of cats playing with the automatic doors. Mom, look. Anything to distract my mother. She's weak, she's grumpy, struggling, scared. You know, cats. Look, Mom, they're so cute. Hi, kitty, how cute. Kittens, Jesus. What is taking them so long? Go see. I don't know. I'm not even sure they know we're here. But I say, you know, they got to disinfect the rooms. They have to check us in. Look, there's the kitten again. Distract. Until finally, a nurse comes down. Marwan. Even sealed behind PPE, he brings warmth and life. Okay, we're ready for you, Maria. Where is she from? Philippines? Ah, okay. Is this your mom? Okay. Here's what we're going to do. Once they're ready for her, I'm going to take her in this wheelchair, those doors upstairs to the COVID unit, and you're going to turn around, you go through those doors, and you wait there. She can't stay. My mom's panic is rising. It's unbearable. Can I just stay with her in her room? You can't come up to a COVID unit. It's impossible. What if I'm positive? What if I have COVID too? I mean, I already have it. And it wasn't a lie. I tested positive about a week ago. And my mom's I come to see her, and while I can't be sure, I'm pretty sure I gave her COVID. In fact, at least 8 of us had it because my cousins insisted on seeing us tonight. Because, you know, we need it. Because grief is impossible alone. Because I was in Beirut to help my mother. Because my dad had just, So suffice it to say, decisions were made. But I didn't tell Nurse Marwan that last part. Managing the terror was hard enough without exposing the grief that scaffolded it, and I had a job to do. So instead, I showed him my positive test results, and then, what is with those cats? They are so cute. Yes, they're all over now. Ever since the port explosion, you know, they've been here, so many cats. Pauvre Liban. I'll see what I can do. Maybe if you're positive, it changes things. Both the people for Lebanon. So this was barely a month after the Beirut port explosion. Maybe you heard about it, maybe not. I'm not actually sure if my dad ever did. He was already in the hospital in Syria by then. So on the day of the blast, when I finally got through on the phone to my mom who was in Lebanon, she said she was fine. Everyone is fine. Don't worry, no damage. And your father's okay. He's still the same. Thank God he's in Damascus. If he wasn't there in the hospital, he might have been out with friends here in Beirut. Okay, so in my family, there's something oddly familiar about bad news actually being good news, because it might have been much worse news. So I've gone along with it. Like, yeah, thank God, Dad's in the hospital with COVID in Damascus and not in the blast in Beirut. Like, totally super. So my mom comes back smiling. But there's no bed, only a recliner. Also, I'm not allowed to leave the room. I'll soon find out I'm not even allowed to open the door. So that chair does not recline. So you know through all of this, I have one goal, right? Keep her alive. My sister and I cannot lose another parent. I cannot kill my mother. We can't be orphans. Fuck that. I haven't even figured out how to tell the U.S. government the first time fucking that there's no U.S. consulate in Syria. We have to back channel his death certificate through the chain. Whatever. It's like a very long story. I got to the wheelchair presented to me. She is transferred to hers. We are rolled in the same place. My mother and I. Up to the COVID ward. So on the first day, I learned my mom is scared of needles, and they'll be drawing blood regularly. So I text family to send iPads, chargers. On the second day, I learned it comes as supposed to say, hey, you're just here for monitoring. You're not even on oxygen. I text that to everyone who keeps tagging on us, everyone anxious, everyone reading. Oxygen level good. Straight oxygen. On the third day, they put her on oxygen. But the staff, they treat it as very low priority. So when an anomaly exists, I ask, what level of COVID is she? To which the nurse replies, level. There's no level. Why does everyone keep asking? Tell your auntie, she's level 5. But then on the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th days, I learned over and over how false hope makes time stretch into eternity. So when they first introduced the idea of sending my mom home, I was excited. But each day, something would happen to reverse the decision to discharge her. And each time, at 3 p.m., my mom would go silent and wide-eyed, and I didn't have the capacity to distract her out of that room. So for weeks, I was extremely social dad. I've been stuck in his living room in Beirut. His weekly Damascus Beirut was on hiatus, so I think Malibu to Laguna with a crossing in the middle. But the border was shut, so they complied-ish. The way older folks would do a lot of commuting was like a great life hack to experience the war, make comply. No. Anyway, once that border, you bet he commuted back to his beloved friends and dear friends. After my dad died, I started noticing things we had in common. And one thing, which is maybe the thing that killed him, we both really love, maybe even a solid hang with a bunch of old friends. And sometimes that's why Los Angeles can be a little hard for me, because as the saying goes, you can't really make old friends quickly. My dad loved Damascus. Dear friends, card games, dinners. Some of these guys have been playing poker together on and off for over 50 years. They've known each other as schoolboys and grown up to be bankers, lawyers, doctors. I mean, one of these buddies would be there overseeing my dad's release, and that same doctor would be standing over him a few hours later, unable to resuscitate him. My father would die suddenly, and unexpectedly and probably not very peacefully at 3 p.m. on the day he was to be discharged. But our story turned out different. I mean, you know that if you pay attention to the movie. So my mom is finally given a green light, and there is a lot I am leaving out about the kind of patient she was. But here's a clue. Every time a release was delayed, she would be grief-stricken, frustrated. So, I mean, what would you think would happen when I told her we were actually, what? What is wrong with these people? How can we cope with this cough? Throughout our last day, each person testified, we told you just took a little time. What we don't know right then is that home will be like a whole other journey for us. It's one we're kind of still on, but in that moment, success. We made it. All 8 of us recovered, some with more ease than others, but my sister and I were not orphans. I had not killed my mother. And if I had time to tell you everything that has happened since, you might be surprised to learn I still have not killed her. So all of that bad news turned out to have been good news. To be honest, it really could have been much worse than this.
Raphael Clemens is next. We're so lucky. Ready?
Okay. So if you survey a random number of people and ask, what do you fear? You'd get a wide range of answers. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of flying. I'm terrified of going to the dentist or the doctor. I'm afraid of being broke and becoming homeless. I'm scared of losing my family. If you ask African Americans what they fear, you might hear various scenarios involving the police. I'm afraid of being pulled over for no apparent reason. I'm terrified of my black child being shot for holding a cell phone or playing a toy gun. I'm afraid of the police burst into my home because of a complaint or because they got the wrong address. You might also hear black people being afraid of worshiping at their church or mosque, going to their neighborhood supermarket, black men jogging in their neighborhood. There are other groups in this country who are justifiably afraid right now. Jewish people worry about worshiping while at synagogue. Since the pandemic, Asians worry about walking down the street or going to their corner store. And I imagine that anytime a member of the LGBTQ community goes to a nightclub that serves their community to dance and have fun, there's that nagging feeling that something could pop off. So let me just memorize the location of all the exits. It's not an exaggeration that these are fears that most straight Black Americans don't have to worry about. The murder of Tyre Nichols by 5 police officers in Memphis brought up in me that same feeling of anger, numbness, and despair that has occurred much too frequently. That the officers were Black men didn't change my belief that police departments all over America are institutionally structured to view Black and brown people as more dangerous, more criminally inclined, and thus approach such groups more often with violence. What do Black people have to do in America to feel safe? But I always ask myself regarding the police, what do I specifically have to worry about? See, I present to the world in a certain way. I'm a middle-aged Black man. I'm well under 6 feet tall, usually in dress clothing that doesn't draw attention. I wear eyeglasses, clean shaven, no noticeable tattoos. In my life, I have been stopped by the police 2 times. Once last year by a motorcycle patrol cop after I was driving 50 on a 35-mile-per-hour road, and about a dozen years ago for inadvertently turning the wrong way onto a one-way street. Both instances ended with no harm to me. But I'm under no illusions here. Just because I appear non-threatening and have not yet had any violent encounters with the police or others wishing to do me harm because of my skin color, doesn't mean it can't happen at any moment. And if I were wearing a hoodie, jeans, and Timberlands walking on Rodeo Drive, Beverly Hills, or in Brentwood, or if I happen to be driving my Ford Fusion in a gated community, things could well be different. My teenage and college years were spent in Tennessee. I was a wrestler in school, and part of my training routine involved distance running. There was nothing to keep me from being approached the way Ahmaud Arbery was jogging his neighborhood in Georgia. White cisgendered men and women in America don't have to fear the police or institutional racism. Now, you may have heard stories about Black parents having the talk with their children. They go down a list of things to do if one is ever stopped by a police officer. Keep your hands up in plain sight. Don't make any sudden moves. Be respectful and speak softly. Address the man and woman as officer. Answer the officer's questions simply and directly. Don't embellish. Quietly tell the officer that you're going to get your wallet to show your identification, or you're reaching into the glove compartment to get the vehicle registration. Wait for the officer to give you permission to move. Then retrieve your item slowly. Never sass, never accuse, don't give attitude. In short, don't do or say anything to give that police officer any reason to detain you or worse. Black parents in America teach their children to bend over backwards to accommodate a police officer because they want their children to come home safely. Now, how can one grow up feeling safe if those are the messages they consistently hear as children? And even with that instruction, sometimes it's not enough. Unarmed Black people, Black and brown people, die anyway. I mean, how is anyone supposed to feel safe when it is literally, you feel like you're playing Russian roulette every time you get into your car? And why is the onus for changing their behavior placed on Black people? I mean, it's the police who are doing the killing. According to Statistica.com, the rate of fatal police shootings among Black Americans is much higher than that for any other ethnicity, standing at 5.9 fatal shootings per million of the population per year between 2015 and January of 2023. So now compare that to 2.3 fatal shootings of white Americans per million during that same time period, or 2.9 fatal shootings of Hispanics, and 0.9 fatal shootings of everybody else. I mean, clearly, structural changes must be made at police and sheriff's departments throughout the U.S. The police must learn to see Black and brown-skinned people as human beings. Now, you'd be surprised maybe that I honestly don't feel the police. I honestly don't fear the police. Though it's a possibility of a deadly encounter, it's always there. My fear is of a more immediate and intimate variety. In August, shortly before my birthday this year, I received a cancer diagnosis. It's one hell of a 60th birthday present. Now, my particular cancer, it's not aggressive. It's slow moving, and the size of the affected area is allowing me to perform active surveillance, keeping a close eye on it by getting blood work done every 3 months. If the cancer grows, then I have to make some decisions on my course of treatment. These past 5 months, I found it difficult to focus. Things that I found joy in doing, watching movies, writing, seeing theater, working out, chanting, often feels like background noise. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about this diagnosis. I mean, I'm not panicked, but I'm feeling a bit detached from the whole experience. I'd like to think I'd be courageous, advocate for myself when I'm talking with my doctors, and get through the various treatments and take on the side effects with minimal or no fuss and make a full recovery. This situation has undermined my sense of safety. I always fear I'll sabotage my treatment. I'll give up, become a quivering mess, afraid of pain and sickness, and unable to do what's necessary to make a full recovery. And the only thing I can do at moments like these is turn to my tribe. That's what the smart people do, right?
Mm.
My wife Angie has been there with me throughout. I call my friends who have been through the same cancer journey themselves for advice and support. I read what I can on the subject, not overdoing it with the research so as to not feel overwhelmed and paralyzed. Sometimes too much information is just as bad as not enough. I go to work, spend time with my friends and family, and I do things to make myself happy. So you may be wondering how my cancer diagnosis and unarmed Black and brown people getting killed by police are connected. It's the possibility of imminent death that's the connection. How does one feel safe and secure when facing a life-threatening moment? We don't. We often revert to fight or flight behavior, running from the police in the case of Tyree Nichol, or not wanting to face having cancer. I choose to deal with both scenarios the same way Black people in America have for centuries. Lean on my family, lean on friends, lean on art, lean on creativity. Thank you.
Terry,
How am I supposed to follow?
I don't know. You can do it. So Terry, you haven't joined us since before the pandemic, right? Or during the pandemic, but this is your first time on stage. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Terry John.
True story. Two of the scariest times of my life happened at my mom's house. It really is not a coincidence. It was, after all, my mom's house. A place where anything could happen and often did. Mom's house. Growing up, we moved a lot. She was always looking for an opportunity to make a better living. She bought her first bar when I was 5. Over time, she owned 6 bars. She never made a good living, but she remained undeterred. Moving and starting over was nothing to her. She just packed us up, unpacked, or mostly unpacked, recreated basically the same environment in different spaces using the same stuff. Her homes were very clean and very chaotic, very cluttered, very unconventional. Her spaces looked like an antique gift shop mixed with mid-century farmhouse, colorful antique lamps, big barn bowls full of pens and papers with handwritten notes about everything, an old rocking horse with a doll for a rider, piles of folded laundry on every surface, photos of family and old paintings crowding every wall, in the kitchen, silverware poked out of canning jars in the middle of the table, with more notes held together by clothespins. Boxes full of items were unceremoniously shoved under cabinets, corners, and against walls. While she moved with an open heart, a sense of optimism and adventure, I agonized over it every time. I have OCD. It wasn't a thing back then. It was that I was just a quiet one. He loved to organize kitchen cabinets and insisted on all the shoes by the door being lined up just so. I was the one being dramatic when I raged against another move. I spent my childhood attempting to make sense out of chaos and order out of clutter, but I was beaten badly every time. Even as an adult in her house, it just could send me into sensory overload. Just the thought of spending a night in her house could make me shudder. I avoided staying at her house for decades. And then I got married, and things changed. My husband adored my mom, and she adored him. So it happened during a phone call, my mom tells him that we should stay for a few days at her place when we visit Nebraska, and he's the showing. I tried to explain that's a really bad idea, but he's looking forward to it. So after driving 4,700 miles past Omaha onto a 2-lane highway to a gravel road, and 6 miles later arrived at Mom's new place. She had moved back to the small village in the middle of nowhere, the same place she had owned, the one bar owned 30 years prior. The bar with the living quarters in the back where I spent my miserable teen years. That place. Now, the bar was closed and the town was a cluster of houses on top of a hill, a gravel road going through it to the middle of the hill. Her place was a very old house on the edge of town. It had a broken down front porch and her trademark plastic nailed over the windows, her way of creating storm windows to heat it. Walking in, it was the same. The antiques, notes, laundry everywhere, the smell of bleach and laundry soap. We were really tired from driving, but stayed up talking for hours over her bowls of chili as a windstorm began howling outside. It was time for bed. We had to figure out where to sleep. This is because my mother hasn't slept in bed for decades, and she sleeps sitting on a chair or a sofa, so she doesn't give much thought to where others will sleep. She went upstairs to sleep on the couch. We decided my husband would take the sofa and I would take the twin bed in the very tiny room. The twin bed was awful. It felt as though it was lying on springs. The windstorm had really kicked up. Things were banging around outside. Trees were scraping the roof. The house was shuddering. Everything was creepy. And I am praying that the night goes quickly. Someone looked up to sleep. I hear a man's voice as if he is right in my ear. Wake up. I open my eyes and look around. Nothing. Then the voice yells, get up now. I get up. Thinking danger is imminent, that the voice must be a warning. I walk around the dark house. Everyone's sleeping. Everything seems to be okay. The creepiness of the wind outside gives me goosebumps, and a chill goes up my spine, and somehow I become convinced someone is coming to kill us all. I have never been paranoid in my life, but this fear was complete. Someone was coming to kill us. I had to save us, or we were going to die. I go into action mode first. I'm checking the front door, which of course is unlocked because my mother never locks the door. And she keeps her keys in the car in the ignition so she knows where they are. I lock the front door, the back door, to discover. So I put a chair under the doorknob to make it harder for the murderers to open and hear them coming. I decide to position myself near the front door to stand guard. From there, I can keep an eye on the road in front, and I can see through the kitchen to where the back door is, and I wait. Not long after, I see a little flashlight by the back door, pointed to the ground and going towards the room where I was sleeping. My stomach is in my throat. I am so scared I couldn't scream if I had to, but I could move. decide to get behind the killer, keeping the element of surprise. I'm thinking where the light is. I'm thinking, we're going. And I'm in the flesh. What if we're killing? Bathroom door opens, a little flashlight breathe. I hear a grunt of pain. My husband ran into the chair that I put in front of the back door. All his things, is that you? What are you doing walking around with a pain? He said, I don't want to wake you. His voice brought me back to a safe place. We're okay. No murderers. Just Gwen, Mom's icky house. Morning will come soon. I followed him to the sofa like a hole and crawled in behind him. The next morning, the loud sounds of my mom washing dishes pulls me out of a heavy sleep. Loud watery threads, crashes of silverware thrown in the drain, clinking and clanking of dishes hitting each other. Mom says she likes to wash dishes in the morning. I always thought it was her passive-aggressive way of making us up. My husband is sitting in the kitchen at the kitchen table, most happy as pie, enjoying coffee. I'm still traumatized by the murderers. I tell them about the man yelling in my ear to get up. Oh, that's probably the ghost, my ghost. The ghost? I have a ghost? My husband says he heard a creaking sound all night like a rocking chair. Mom said, oh, that's definitely a ghost. I never told her she had a ghost. Mom said, it's no big deal. Right there was my childhood sentence. To my husband agrees again to stay at her house. To which I refused and said, we can stay at my sister's house. Oh, my God, I don't see Mom daily. It's only an hour's drive. But that year, he once again bought the old bar in that little town. It was in terrible shape and needed a lot of work. The bar was less than a quarter mile up the road from her creepy house, her creepy ghost-infested house. My husband said he would like to work on the bar. And he didn't want to drive 2 hours every day. I'll lose the battle. I also lost the battle over bringing our little dog Happy with it. I don't remember too much about that whole day, except we were in that little village on her bar. My husband was low on nails with a nail gun and asked me to drive to the next town to get more. I was going to take Happy with me, but he said, "Come here with me." When I returned to the bar with the nail, I see my husband is working, and I ask, where's Happy? He tells me Mom took her to the house. I get a really bad feeling. Jump in the car and drive to Mom. Yeah, I know it's only a quarter mile, but that's the way we roll. As her house comes into view, to my word, I see smoke billowing out of every window. Mom's car is not there, and I knew that she would not take my dog with her. My mind screams, Happy is in there. I run in the front door, and I call for Happy, and nothing. Black smoke is stinging my eyes. I'm crouching down, think of it, calling and gagging, and I'm looking in places I think she might be hiding. I find her in an open window with her little nose pressed up against the screen to breathe. I grab her and run out to fresh air. At that moment, my mother, I yell, fire. In case you didn't notice. She sneaked off the bar to go get my husband. And blasted the kitchen fire. A pink sandy substance covered the stove and everything else in the kitchen. The fire was out. What caused the fire, you might ask? It turns out Mom was frying bacon and forgot about it when she left to run her own errand. The pan was a melted, toxic mess. The stench from the fire was overwhelming. We opened all the doors and windows, and we set up fans to blow the air out. After a couple of hours of this, the house still leaked. I would like to say we drove to the city and we stayed in a very nice hotel. But no. And the emotional chain reaction falls like dominoes. My husband doesn't want to leave my mom alone with the mess. I now feel I have to stay because he's staying. And of course, I hated them both the whole night. Well, I was struggling being in that house where everything smelled toxic and they were insisting it wasn't that bad.
Sure.
It was that bad. Poppy slept with me in the awful twin bed, the window wide open, me hoping for a little puff of fresh air. I did give thanks to God that the plastic had not been on the windows as I nodded off. I woke to the clanging of dishes in the sink. I went to the kitchen. I saw my mom consumed in her task. Her kitchen was clean, with little trays of the pink extinguisher powder. I took in the sight of her. Her back hushed over her sink, her gray hair, her head wobbled with age, and her total commitment to her labor. I took a moment to admire her tenacity, to respect the difficulty she went through, to be awed that through it all she kept a sweet disposition. Washing her dishes in the morning, she was doing what she had always done. She was carrying on. And so did I. With a kiss, a hug, and no hard feelings, I never stayed in her house again. Because at the end of the day, we
A hand for Odd who put out the fire. What?
Lucy,
Are you ready?
you bet.
You bet. Let's foster everybody.
Oh my. Everyone. That's where I want it. Okay, good. This one felt different. Our first adoption attempt was with a white woman named Deborah Finn from Iowa City, Iowa. After an introductory 45-minute phone call, Michael and I found out she was in dire need of 2 months' rent, a quadruple X winter coat, and an allowance to sustain her runaway Mountain Dew habit. 2 weeks after sending her the check and the winter coat, she stopped taking our calls, and like a slap in the face, we realized we had been scammed. Our second adoption attempt was with a couple from Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. He was black, and his name was Clarence Endicott III. She was white, and her name might have been Lorraine. We flew them out to Los Angeles, and after treating them to a tour of the movie stars' homes, we found out that maybe Lorraine had not had any prenatal care.
Our OBGYN, a drop-dead gorgeous gay man with silver fox hair, polished mahogany eyes, and the delightful name of Dr. Santiago Flores, informed us that the fetus's organs were underdeveloped, and once he was delivered, he probably wouldn't survive the day. The baby, who the birth parents ended up christening Clarence Endicott IV, lived 17 hours. Keisha, the birth mother of our third adoption attempt, was a black high school senior who showed up at the Denny's on Vermont exceptionally pregnant. Her entourage included the baby's father, their 1.5-year-old son, as well as Keisha's mother, who as a grandmother was younger than both Michael and I. Having been burnt twice, we were dubious about our prospects with this family. It was Keisha's mother, Vanessa, who confided, "I told Keisha, if you put this baby up for adoption, that's your choice. But once you make that decision, you have to stick to it. I don't want you changing your mind on these nice men." Her words provided much needed assurance. And after a round of 3 p.m. pancakes and bottomless mugs of almost intolerable coffee, we agreed to move forward to the next steps in the process. Like I said, third time's a charm. This one felt completely different. 10 months previous, at the beginning of our adoption journey, Michael and I went to the Gay Dads Adoption Fair. I'm going to let that sink in. Gay Dads Adoption Fair, this does exist. Where Michael and I fell in love. We fell in love with the idea of open adoption. Well, maybe that's not completely true. I've known friends and relatives who were adopted who weren't given the opportunity to make contact with their birth families, and because of that have always felt like a piece was missing. At the Gay Dads Adoption Fair, we spoke to a social worker who promoted open adoption, whereby the birth mother forms a relationship with the adopted family, and something inside me clicked. I agreed with her philosophy wholeheartedly. The have the baby slam the door and never the twain shall meet way of doing things seemed outdated. I wanted for our future children not to feel as if a piece was missing. So out of that conversation, Stace became our adoption social worker, and although not in love with open adoption initially, I gently nudged my husband in that direction. Once we were officially part of the adoption agency, we were asked to put together a photo album of sorts showing pictures of our lives. This is where we live. This would be the baby's bedroom. This is a picture of us in Rome, proving that we have the finances to support your baby. Then the birth mothers would thumb through all the prospective parents' photo albums and pick 3 families to interview. One of those would then become the adopted family. Michael and I knew if we could get a meeting with a birth mother, we could cinch the deal. It'd be like an audition. Our job would be to channel fun-loving parents, which wouldn't be hard for us because when we enter into a space, heads turn. What birth mother wouldn't want a piece of us? Along with the mandatory adoption class, the agency offered various seminars. At one, there was an adoptive husband-wife team and the birth mother who chose them. She'd already given birth and the couple were happily raising the baby. They talked about the intricate dance that took place for all of them to be on the same page. I remember this tender moment when the birth mom leaned over and touched, the adopted mom leaned over and touched the birth mom's hand, confiding to us that they still offered birth mom support and made sure she got to her NA meetings. It was not like any family I had known. It was unconventional. Lines were blurred. But this triad was forging their own definition of family. Being in an interracial gay relationship, that resounded deeply, and I wanted that kind of bond with our future birth mother. Stace called a special meeting for Michael and I to assess our progress. We had already connected with Deborah Finn and maybe Lorraine through their Foster Adopt program, which, being an open adoption agency, was not their strong suit. With a tone that hinted that bad news was imminent, Stace confessed, "None of the birth mothers want to meet with you. They all support the idea of same-sex parents, but they'd rather go the more traditional route."
Michael and I were shell-shocked. We knew if we could just get our foot in the door, we could knock their socks off, but we weren't even given the chance to audition, take a meeting. We asked Stace what our options were, and she suggested we get an adoption lawyer. I pictured someone folksy like Wilfred Brimley. Someone who speaks in Pepperidge Farm's lingo with the paternal hayseed quality of Jed Clampett. After forking over a $5,000 retainer, we hired the best adoption attorney in Los Angeles. We know this because he told us so. That, and in his reception area, prominently on display, there was a framed photograph of Jamie Lee Curtis, Christopher Guest, and their adopted daughter. Let's call him J.K. Huffaker, which is not our lawyer's real name, but is the name of my retired dentist. Whereas our lawyer might sue us for violating his right of publicity, he's that good. The real J.K. Huffaker, retired dentist, would probably get a kick out of being in this story. Ironic side note, the real J.K. Huffaker actually does have the bearing of Wilfred Brimley, but in this story, for our purposes, J.K. Huffaker, cutthroat adoption lawyer, is vicious and willfully intolerant. Less Wilfred Brimley, more like the characters played by J.K. Simmons crossed with J.K. Rowling. At our initial meeting, J.K. Huffaker was dismissive and made us feel like we were impositions. He also boasted a lot, claiming he could cast a wider net than our adoption agency. I'm not going to lie, I flat out did not like this man. But, true to his word, calls from birth mothers came in almost immediately, one of them being from Keisha. After our successful afternoon breakfast with Keisha's family at the Denny's, we called J.K. Huffaker, and with his input as well as Keisha and her family's, it was my assessment that Michael and I had ahead of us 4 hurdles. The doctor, we had to make sure the baby was healthy. The lawyer, to sign some preliminary contracts. The birth great-grandmother, this was Vanessa's idea. She warned us her mother could be a bee, her terminology, but thought things might go more smoothly if we kissed the ring. And finally, the adoption agency where the final batch of paperwork would be signed. Adoption being as tenuous as it is, it was important that each hurdle be cleared effortlessly, because if it wasn't, the whole thing would fall apart. Doctor, lawyer, birth great-grandmother, adoption agency. The doctor. Because we had a professional connection with Dr. Santiago Flores, and I wanted to get lost in his dreamy eyes once again, we decided to continue with his services. In contrast to what happened with maybe Lorraine, everything went smoothly. All we had to do was schedule the C-section. His first free date was April 1st. I immediately said yes. Michael, my overly superstitious husband, was dead set against operating heavy machinery on April Fool's Day, let alone scheduling a birth. I was worried this opportunity would slip through our fingers if we didn't act fast. In the end, I got my way. After the appointment, Keisha and Dwight, the baby's father, pulled us aside. They were still driving to and from Vegas and having problems with their car's transmission. Although embarrassed, they asked us for $579 to get it repaired. We told them we'd bring the check with us the next day when we met with the lawyer. I was stunned by how friendly J.K. Huffaker was to Keisha and Dwight. He shed his reptilian scales and before my eyes became fucking Wilfred Brimley. In watching Keisha answer his questions, so attentive, so mature, I realized how much I liked this young woman and I really wanted her in my life. I could see Michael and I as one of those obnoxious couples who brag about their tremendous adoption story. I imagine introducing her to our frou-frou friends. Oh, and by the way, this is our birth mother, Keisha. I even saw the 3 of us leading a meeting at the agency, making everyone in attendance jealous. I tried not to indulge in these kind of daydreams, but in that moment, it just felt right. Our business completed. J.K. Huffaker shook our hands. Keisha, Dwight, Michael, and I said our goodbyes, and we walked out into reception. I glanced over to the receptionist's desk and saw a pile of outgoing mail, on top of which was a manila envelope with the law firm's return address embossed on the corner, and the addressee on the envelope was no other than the Mountain Dew guzzler, Deborah Finn herself. I erupted right then and there, demanding to know what business my lawyer had with this woman who embezzled money from us. The receptionist immediately turned the envelope upside down, as if that exonerated her from sharing client info. J.K. Huffaker heard my heated tone, came out into the lobby, asked what was going on. I reiterated my frustration. He indulged in a ludicrous moment, straightening out the Jamie Lee Curtis family photo smidge. Then he reverted back to his patronizing self. It would be unethical of me to offer you any further information. Insisting on getting in the last word, I sniped, "She is a horrible person, and she'll probably cheat your client as well." In the parking garage, I was still fuming. But thankfully, Michael was there to put his perspective on it. I get that you're mad, but now is not the time. We are expected at Vanessa's mother's house in a half an hour. He was right. I checked my emotion, put on my game face, because we were off to meet the bee herself, the great-grandmother. We knew the family matriarch was against this adoption, but nothing could have prepared us for the ill-tempered canker sore that was her front door opened just enough to framework a tough old bird who easily looked a ragged 15 years older than what we had estimated. Her darting eyes, informed by a lifetime of judgmental biblical bile, indicated to us she knew exactly who we were, and we most definitely were not welcome. We introduced ourselves anyway, and Isella Buell luxuriated in disgust before grousing, "Well, I guess you better come in." Curtains must have been drawn because it took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the inner gloom. Our feet didn't make any sound when we walked, but I had the impression that was because of clutter rather than carpeting. We were led to a front room where Keisha and Vanessa were nervously waiting. I could see Dwight and the toddler through a doorway to what appeared to be the kitchen. No drinks were offered. No one was invited to sit. Isella Buell broke the silence. "You might as well say what you gotta say." My charming husband said a joke to break the ice. It failed miserably and landed with a muffled thud, rolling about with the odds and ends on the floor. Didn't matter how we presented. Didn't matter our deferential tone. Isella Buell deflected our good intentions with life hardships she's had to endure. Drug and abuse had figured heavily into her family's narrative, and yet she doggedly insisted on living by the axiom, "We take care of our own." Since she raised her children in strenuous circumstances, and from what I could gather, Isella Buell was still raising children, an addicted niece and an abandoned granddaughter, then why couldn't Keisha shoulder her own responsibility? Every assurance was shut down. Any bit of levity uttered in that room that never saw daylight was scowled at. This was the first time I remember someone hating Michael and I jointly, not for what we were, Sorry, one more time. This is the first time I remember someone hating Michael and I jointly for what we were, not for anything we did. In fact, we were presenting ourselves as a solution, but because, well, take your pick. We're gay, we're interracial, we're utterly fabulous. I tried one more tactic. "This child," I cautiously began, "will always know where she came from. And if you have a family gathering of any kind, we would make sure that she was a part of it." At that, Isella Buell twisted up her face with a grimace and sucked her teeth. "You better go." We started to leave when I remembered the check for the $579 was still in my pocket. I neglected to give it to Keisha and Dwight earlier. With how we'd just been treated, I could have conveniently forgotten it altogether, but that felt wrong. I handed it to Keisha, whose mumbled thanks fell to the floor, joining the rest of the debris. 4 days later, we had our meeting with the adoption agency. Michael arrived early, full of trepidation. 15 minutes after the hour, and Keisha and Dwight hadn't shown up. I wondered if they had car transmission problems. After 30 minutes, there still was no sign, so I called Keisha's number. She didn't answer. "Hey, friendly reminder." After 45 minutes, "It looks like you missed your meeting. We're going to have to reschedule." On the drive home, "Keisha, please get back to us. We're getting worried." 4 calls, 5 calls, 6, each one going to voicemail. In our bones, we knew. But to have closure, I needed to hear from Keisha herself. 3 days after the meeting that didn't happen, her phone was answered. My heart skipped a beat, and then, "You need to stop calling here." It was the spiteful voice of Isella Buell. Barely managing to keep my composure, I said, "I was hoping to speak to Keisha. She's not going to talk to you," the old biddy snapped. "If the adoption is off, she needs to tell us." "Oh, you better believe it's off," her perceived victory dripping like acid. I wasn't satisfied. "The C-section is still scheduled for Monday. You go and cancel that appointment. We're going to county." County Hospital is notorious for offering subpar care. I couldn't believe the short-sightedness of this woman. I tried one more time. "Don't you want what's best for your granddaughter?" With all the pious venom she could muster, Isella Buell sneered, "It's not up to me. It's God's will." Then she hung up. I felt like I'd been abused. When Michael got home, I sat him down. I told him about the call. Without a word, he left the house and went for a drive. He was gone for 5 hours. He refused to tell me where he had been. My mind began to play out grim scenarios. Did he score drugs, get a hooker, binge Krispy Kremes? About a week later, we were in bed, and out of the blue, he whispered, "I couldn't do it." "What are you talking about?" Michael took a deep breath and continued. "I went back to that woman's house. I sat on the sidewalk just looking at it, trying to figure out what to do, and then it came to me. I'll burn the fucker down." Michael, "No. But I didn't know how. Do I buy gasoline? Do I call in a favor?" I was at a loss as to what friend owed him such a favor. That cunt ruined our adoption. Adoption last night. That cunt, great moment. I'm doing it again. Attention. That cunt ruined our adoption. And with that, Michael Shepard broke down. His whole being shook as deep, rich sobs stuck at the back of his throat. The first attempt was a white boy. The second, a mixed-race boy, Keisha's baby. The baby Michael secretly most wanted was a black girl. As tears fell and his bodies trembled, his profound remorse jolted our foundation and summoned the ancestors. I did what I do. I bore witness, and I held him. A couple of thoughts. Never schedule a C-section on April Fool's Day. And going through the adoption process was one of the most trying parts of my life. No guarantees can be offered, no safe and sound. I do know people who came out the other side of adoption unscathed, but there are others of us who landed knee deep in the remnants of rubble, ashes, and soot. But there are times, and these are few and far between, when out of those ashes a phoenix does rise. 2 weeks later, Stace called. We have a boy. He's white, 4 months old, and he needs a family. Are you and Michael ready?
That was Sebastian. That was our boy Sebastian. Thank you. Thank you. One more. This guy, this fucking guy, right? Everybody, Nick Ullis.
Sit down at my age and you can't get up. We all want to belong somewhere. We want to be part of a neighborhood. But I, born in Britain, now an American citizen, have 2 passports and 2 nationalities, and I find the whole concept of a neighborhood tricky. First of all, real estate agents use the word neighborhood all the time, and I think that's not a good sign. And then I've noticed that all those people who tell you how great their neighborhood was when they grew up don't live there anymore. It could just be my cynicism, but I suspect that neighborhood is a social construct sort of put together in some way to give us the illusory feeling that we actually belong somewhere. In the mid-'80s, I put together an autobiographical one-man show, and since then, I've performed many different versions of it, but it always starts in the same way. Let me introduce myself. My name is Nick Ullett, and as most of you have probably worked out by now from my accent, I was originally English. I was born in Great Britain, or Britain as it is now known. I come from a small village called Brancaster Stade. It's on the east coast of England, where it rains endlessly, and no one talks of anything but the tide. And I mean this literally. When you meet someone on the street, and you go, "Hey, Tom, how you doing?" Looks like a high tide. And that's it. I mean, that's all they talk about. The tide's in, the tide's out, it's high, it's low, it's falling, it's rising, it's on the turn, it's waning, it's a full tide, a spring tide, a neap tide. When I was about 5 years old, I remember walking down the village, the main sort of street, holding my father's hand and hearing people greet each other, and all I could hear was, "High tide, high tide, high tide, high tide." For years, I thought everybody in the village was named Tide. I remember once going back to see my parents, who I had not seen for several years. This was sort of in the beginning of the 70s, maybe 73, something like that. And I was really looking forward to it. I love my parents. And I took the train up from London to King's Lynn. And when I arrived, they were waiting for me, standing on the platform in that gentle, drizzling rain that the English call summer. And I ran down the platform, and I picked up my mother, and I kissed her, and I hugged my father, and I said, "So, Dad, how are you?" And my father, who had not seen me for a few years, was looking at me with tears in his eyes, and he went, "Tide's in." It's so emotional. There is a problem here. It's not true. I was born in North London during the Second World War, where we lived in a small house until we were bombed out of it. And we then moved to a small village north of London, from where, when I was 7.5, I was sent off to a boarding school, where I remained until I was 17. I then hitchhiked to Spain and lived there for 1.5 years, followed by 3 years at Cambridge University. And within a year of my graduation, I came to New York in America. Since then, I've lived either in New York or in Los Angeles. The village of Brancaster Stade never showed up in my life until I was at least 9 years old, when my parents bought a cottage there for our summer vacations. So how come I claim it as my own? Something in me is a gypsy. My upbringing through the age of 23 sort of proves that. I love to wander. At night, I prowl the streets of whatever city I happen to be in. On the road, I stop at all roadside attractions. The Mystery Spot, the Reptile Museum, the Winking Virgin Mary, that was in Ireland, and even the world's largest ball of twine. If you want an adventure, I'm your man. But I too want to belong. And in acting, I found my ideal career because it satisfies every gypsy desire. I work all over the country, and when I'm in a play, it's usually for 2 or 3 months. So not only is there new territory to explore, I get to do it with a new group of people, an instant community. What I love about it is that I have to trust these people. I have no choice. We're all on stage together. I am completely dependent on them, and they on me. And it doesn't matter if I don't like them or if one of them is clearly an asshole. We all have to be together. We literally this century alone, I've acted in New York, in La Jolla, Santa Cruz, in Naples, Florida, in the Berkshires. And when the people with whom I work want to know where you're from, I tell them about Breakfast of Sting. I'm not lying to them. They know I live in LA. But I want them to know who I am, and for some reason, I am this village. When I go back to England, I take a train from London. There comes a point in the trip after you leave Cambridge when the great medieval cathedral of Ely rises up. It's flat country, the fens. It's an amazing sight. And it sits above the flat black earth of the fens. And I feel at that moment completely at home. It is the landscape of my youth. My children and my grandchildren have spent almost, you got a picture of them somewhere? There you go. That was last summer. They have spent, well, just lots of summers of their lives in Brancaster State, where they have been educated in the fine art of British conversation, which consists mainly of being able to talk to anyone about the weather, or in the case of our village, the tide. One year, I performed my one-man show as a benefit to replace the village hall's booth. And I was nervous about doing it since the first 20 minutes of it is sort of me poking fun at the village and its preoccupation with the tide. I needn't worry, they loved it. And why not? I was talking about their favorite subject. Every summer in the local church, there's a celebration of the tide in the form of a sea service. It's a sort of nautical version of an annual harvest festival. And the tiny church is filled with sepia portraits of the old fishing families with their wooden boats and nets and lobster pots and whelk catchers and old sails hanging from the rafters. And the vicar pronounces a blessing for those who have died in the past year. And he tells us that they had gone out with God's tide. It really bothers my two girls, and for the next few weeks they keep looking for their dead grandfather in the waves. And I try to explain that this is a metaphor. And like good little Americans that they are, they say, sure, Dad, whatever. But I love the language of the sea service. For those who toil in deep waters and go down to the sea in ships. This is the magnificent language of the King James Version of the Bible. And naturally enough, it's frowned upon by the modern church, who thinks we're not intelligent enough to understand it. The summer after I did my one-man show, my mother was asked to read a lesson during the sea service. A passage from St. Luke about Jesus preaching to the multitudes on the banks of the Sea of Galilee. Now, I have to say, as an actor, I'm always suspicious about how Jesus always got multitudes. I mean, was there never a slow night? A small turnout? No, I'm sorry, Jesus. It's the weather. You know, when it gets cold, it always comes down. Anyhow, my mother is reading from some misbegotten modern translation. And instead of Jesus telling his disciples to cast down your nets and I will make you fishers of men, she stuck with the Jesus who says, you won't just catch fish, you'll catch people. And I, in my stupidity, snorted in derision, and it rang out throughout the church. To disguise it, I cleared my throat, which made me cough, and my mother stopped reading and looked at me with one of those looks that immediately reduced me to the age of 8. But later I was saved when the vicar, at the beginning of his sermon, said, as Nick Hullet so eloquently and amusingly pointed out to us in his little show, we are a village dominated by the tide. There was a murmur in the congregation as they looked around to see who I was. And my mother sat up proudly and turned her head from side to side as though acknowledging applause. Literally, I was saved by the tide. And what's more, about 20 years ago, when my kids were in middle school, phrase, oh, please, Kevin, he's like Mr. Tide. So maybe I'm passing this on. My mother died in 2007 at the age of 98, and now I own her house. So I'm actually a man of property in my self-proclaimed neighborhood. I know that this story has wandered around a bit, but that's what I do. From this collection of thoughts come this. I am my own neighborhood, and here I'm safe and sound, and you're all welcome.
Right? I told you it was a really good story. So our next true story is February, then March 5th, and the theme is Lost and Found. I know, right? And then April 2nd, not first. April 2nd, the theme is the chicken or the egg. So please join us again. And here's where I again ask for money. Seriously, we really want to keep this program going. We really want to make sure that our writers get a little something, and that we can grow this program to a wider audience, because sharing our truth cannot be more important and more fulfilling for all of us. So please support us. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Hutch. Thank you, Maha, Nick, and Raphael. Andrew, are you joining us next one?
Where do I do it?
What's that?
I'd love to donate. How do I do
That's a great question, ESTLosAngeles.org.
so easy.
You just click a button and you can donate and support us. You can also, we will be editing our past couple programs, and they will be up for you to watch again. And that's, I think, Andrew, are you joining us next time? If you can. Angela, she's awesome. Everybody's been awesome. I'm thinking, Hutch, that we'll have a theme of maybe Lorraine. Maybe Lorraine. All right, that's it. That's what I got. I have fresh lemon bread out there for everybody, and cheese and crackers and wine. You at home, eat whatever you want. Help yourself. And thank you all. So fun. I know
They needed to rent the second episode of the Denny's one. And everyone thought, oh, what a good that went that well. No, I never did. I can tell you. But yeah, I enjoyed the last one. In the book format, I really think this chapter is out of the end, and then the Sebastian chapter is the expressions. So that's kind of like in the book format. So that's how that kind of, it doesn't end on history, it ends in. Definitely, there can be hope. Yeah. Thank you. It was the very last